Hi, this is Emily of Beauties and Headcanons. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hey, it's Baxter Colburn here from Public House Media. Did you know that we just added a store here at Public House Media? No, I'm not talking about a grocery store where you can go buy apples or bananas or peanut butter, which are all fantastic, especially when peanut butter's on all of those. Anyway, we've added a store here at Public House Media so you can not only come and represent your favorite podcast network, but also represent your favorite shows as well, too. Just go over to thephmedia.com and look in the top right corner where you'll see the button that says Store. Click on that and you can search through all of our great products. Or if you go to our Facebook page, Public House Media, you can see on the left-hand side a tab that says Store. All of our products are listed there as well too. It's the new Public House Media Store. You don't want to miss it. It is fantastic. Buy some of that great swag to support your favorite shows and to support Public House Media. Check it out today.
What's up, everybody? This is Christian Heimel, host of Press Row here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Press Row, where we talk about the biggest issues in sports with the analysts, experts, and reporters who cover them. No nonsense, hard-hitting interviews on the sports topics you're talking about. A new show comes out every single Thursday. And don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Press Row. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppie. Find out more about me at danielpoppie.com. I've started to do some blogging. I'm not a big blogger naturally. I do a lot of writing. But blogging is something that I find more difficult because I was actually... Have you ever had a conversation where you're talking to someone and you're thinking about yourself and you're talking about yourself and you're suddenly aware of something about yourself because you're talking, it's just coming to you as you're speaking? So I was talking to my wife about blogging, and I was telling her that when you blog, you have to come up with stuff. There's people who blog every single day. They come up with an idea for blogging every single day. And they can come up with it really quickly. For me, I realize that I'm a person who likes really big projects, and I like huge projects that extend over years. That's probably why I like writing a book. That's probably why this is a little different than, this is something I do every single week. I don't do this every single day, but this is a little different because it's talking, and I don't take talking as seriously as writing. Talking can be really powerful. Don't. I'm not trying to say that, but when I write something, I'm very detail oriented for what's written, not necessarily the grammar. But for talking, I'm not so detail oriented because you don't have to proofread stuff when you talk, right? You can just stumble over words and sound like an idiot. But I've started doing some blogging. I'm going to be putting out a post a month, a short one, at the very least. So I'll have one post a month. If I'm up for it, I think I might do some more. That'll be more sporadic, but if you check out danielpoppie.com, there'll be more stuff going on at the website. Also, it's very close to the point where the book is going to get published. My book that it will be coming out in a couple weeks. I'll be sending it to can't remember the title, to a copy editor. I'm a little tired right now. You know, when I had Dan on and we talked about music and creativity in general and different things like that, and I think that he mentioned, or I mentioned, about getting tired around 6 o'clock. It's 6 o'clock right now that I'm recording this, and it's getting me. So check out my website, danielpoppie.com, Poppie spelled Poppie, not like the flower, and you can check out some new blog posts every single month. I will be putting those out the 6th, the 7th, the 10th. I'll tell you what day I'm putting them out. This podcast is brought to you by Public House Media. Check them out on Facebook by typing in Public House Media, or check them out at thephmedia.com. That is thephmedia.com. Our word of the week, to add to our lexicon. Our word of the week is aeronaut. And you're probably like, I've heard this word before. Why do I need to learn it again? And it's because you haven't learned this word before. An aeronaut is a pilot of a balloon or dirigible. Okay? So a Zeppelin pilot is an aeronaut. The more you know. All right, we're going to jump right into our accidental essence. I was going to do something else for this, but I've had this quote just coming up again and again and again, and I think that I just like to talk about it for a bit because there's a reason why people say things and why quotes are made, right? Because when someone says something, a quote is made, right? And I think that if this quote is true, then it's if this quote's true, then I think we should discuss the ramifications of what happens if the quote is true, and if it's not true, then I mean, but I think it has some validity to it. So the quote, there's this famous quote by Ray Bradbury. So I'm going to give you a brief overview on Ray Bradbury, but I'll give you the quote first. So Ray Bradbury has this quote. I believe this is the exact quote because when I wrote it down, I was reading, so I should have it correct. You don't have to burn books to destroy a culture. You just have to get people to stop reading. And I've seen this quote a few different places. I'm in literature classes or English classes a lot, and the teachers like to put up different quotes about stuff, whatever. And this is one of them that was put up. And I like Ray Bradbury. I like his short stories a lot. He wrote tons, and he also this is in relation to Fahrenheit 451. So if you aren't aware of Ray Bradbury stuff, we'll get into that in a bit. But before we start talking about this quote, I think we have to talk about culture. And I think that I don't have a what is a person who's in anthropology? Gosh, I can't even think of it. Anthropologer? That's not right. Man, I can't. It's 6:00, okay? I'm falling asleep right now. Give me a break. So I don't have the anthropological definition of culture. All right? Now I sound smart. See, you can have a podcast too, because if people like my podcast, they're bound to like yours, because your podcast is going to be better than mine, because I can't even talk. All right, so I don't have the anthropological definition of culture, but I've come up with one that I think is sufficient for talking about it right now, and I think that it defines culture in a way that is in line with what a culture is. So I think that a culture, or how it is defined, is an outward manifestation of a group of people. And I know that probably doesn't cover everything. This is just a working definition, so we kind of have the same understanding. So it needs to be a group, and it's a manifestation of that group in some way. There's things brought about because of that group. So it's like, of course, it's language. Of course, it's the music. Of course, the type of food. These things are brought about from the people in some manner, right? It's how a person talks. It's how a person eats. It's table manners. It's everything you can think of. Culture is a really, really, really big umbrella, even if you actually take the anthropological view. What are they called? Anthropologists? Yeah, that's right. Okay. So, but what a culture is, I think within this discussion, we have to first ask if it's really important. So, his quote was, "You don't have to burn books to destroy a culture," because that's in reference to Fahrenheit 451. You just have, this might be from Fahrenheit 451 for all I know. I just can't remember. You just have to get people to stop reading them. But he did write it, so it really is a Ray Bradbury quote. So we have to decide whether culture is important, but we're going to bypass that for a bit. Okay, we're going to bypass that, and we're not going to talk about whether culture is important. We're going to actually talk about what causes culture, because we have to see if his quote is even valid. We have to see if his quote even makes sense, because he essentially is saying, if you break it down, he's saying that books help produce a culture, or books help maintain a culture, or something like that. And if people don't read books, then the culture is going to get destroyed. Now, he could be talking about a specific culture, or he could be talking about culture in the broad. Like, he could be talking about all cultures. I think he's talking about a specific culture, because not all cultures throughout history had the written word. Therefore, their culture could not be destroyed if you stopped reading books, because they never started reading books in the first place. So I think that he's actually talking about Western culture, okay, or cultures that are more modern. But I think that he is actually talking about Western culture. I think that he has a fear that Western culture is going to collapse, that it's going to be destroyed if you stop reading. So what causes culture? And that's the question. So if you've ever heard of the book called Guns, Germs, and Steel, if you have heard of that, you know where I'm going. But if you haven't, I'm going to give you a brief synopsis. So essentially, Guns, Germs, and Steel is this, and it's not exactly this, but if you reference it, if you talk about culture in light of Guns, Germs, and Steel, Guns, Germs, and Steel talks about how different ideas, how different environmental factors shape how a culture is. So we're using culture right now because we are specifically talking about culture in this context. So if, for example, if you don't live by water, if you do not live by a large body of water, well, if you don't live by water, you're not going to be alive. I don't know how people live in the desert. If you don't live by water, you'll be dead, so you won't have much of a culture. But if you don't live by a large body of water, you're not going to be a naval power, right? If you do not live in a northern area, you have no use for warm weather clothing. That's a product of culture. If you have a really small economy, it's probably a trading economy. There's no need for a currency, or there's less of a need for a currency. So all these different factors where you're living is going to affect the manifestation of how you are going to be living, the manifestation of the culture. Again, I'm going back to that idea of culture being the outward manifestation of a group of people. Those people are going to be different, be living differently. Maybe their ideas are going to change because of where they are geographically, or things that happen to them within the world. So one could argue that part of the industrial revolution coming around, can't talk again, is the fact that the bubonic plague came around. I've heard that argument in the past. I don't know how valid that argument actually is, but let's just say, okay, the bubonic plague lowered Europe's population, and it was overcrowded, so then it allowed more industry to take place. It allowed the economy to boom, and it allowed labor-saving devices to come into existence. All right? I don't know how true that is. I've heard the theory before. I've never really investigated the theory, but that would be an environmental factor that's affecting culture. In the same way, in the Americas, before Europeans came over to the Americas, there weren't any horses. So since there weren't any horses, there weren't any, I think buffalo were the biggest animal. Well, you had bears too. Okay. The biggest type of animal, like a farm animal, but they didn't domesticate buffaloes. But there weren't any horses, so you're not going to have a horse culture until you have horses somewhere. They didn't really have big dogs either, so they're not going to be using dogs in a way that's a manifestation of another culture that uses dogs. They're not going to be breeding dogs if they only have chihuahuas, which I think they only had chihuahuas before the Europeans came over to the New World. So along with these environmental factors shaping cultures, I also would add the factor of the human ideas. Okay, I think that some would argue that the environmental factors would actually explain the human ideas. So the human ideas come about because of the environmental factors. But I think that if I was looking at this, I always put in the idea that humans actually have agency. So humans are able to look at their situation and they're able to interact with that situation, whether or not there's specific things interacting with them. So if they're in a really, really cold climate, they don't necessarily have to come up with the exact same thing. Now they're going to come up with something similar, but they have a way of doing that. All right. So I would say that human agency would play a part in that. You could argue against that. That's all right. That's within this discussion. I don't think it's necessary to actually bring that in. But what's the most important aspect of culture? That's the question. Okay. When you look at all this, when a culture comes about, what's the most important aspect of culture? And I would argue that the most important aspect of a culture is the ideas of the culture. Because if you tear everything down and you still have those ideas, you can build the culture back up with those ideas. Now, if you do not have specific ideas, if you just have things that that you have within this culture, there's no ideas behind it. Once you tear those things down, I don't think it's going to be built up in the same way. For instance, I think one really good example of this, for instance, I'm going to say it really oddly, one specific example of a culture that has a very deep set of ideas, historically, I don't know how much anymore, I would say they probably do still, are the Jews, because the Jews didn't always live in the same spot. They were dispersed, the diaspora, that's what it's called, to different areas of the world, but they still kept their culture. They had specific ideas. They had a specific law they followed that was religious, and because of those specific ideas, they maintained a culture that was separate from everyone else's culture. Now, if they didn't hold on to those ideas, then they wouldn't have been separate. There wouldn't have been this distinction between Jews historically and everyone else historically. I think they would have gotten subsumed into everyone else. So we have television versus reading. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself though. So Fahrenheit 451 is about television versus reading. Okay, so there's this idea floating around, and it's incorrect. I've done research on this. You can do research on it yourself. People think that Ray Bradbury wrote Fahrenheit 451 to talk about how the government was going to be dystopian and it was going to the future was going to be bad. People think that it's talking about fascism and different things like that. But Ray Bradbury was actually talking about it was a metaphor for burning books was essentially the overtaking of books and reading with television. So he saw this on the horizon that people were going to start watching TV more, and they weren't going to engage with the ideas of other people through books. Okay? So when you look at culture, we have to ask ourselves, does this quote hold true? Because he was almost certainly referencing, and I didn't, I should have looked this up before, but it didn't come into my mind until it was 4 or 5 minutes, or once I started Our Accidental Lessons. It did not come into my mind until I started Our Accidental Lessons. But I should have checked if this was from Fahrenheit 451. But I'm almost certain it's connected to that if it's not from Fahrenheit 451. So when you look at it from that perspective, that's what we're asking. Does television, because that's what he's talking about, come into a culture, people stop reading, and then the culture is destroyed. So one form of reasoning, one avenue of reasoning we could think about this is we could think, okay, a lack of reading destroys culture because it does not adequately pass on ideas and make a person wrestle with those ideas. Okay, so how that would be, let's just make sure I'm not going ahead. How that would work is with reading. This is how reading works. So when you're reading something, you are coming in contact with a lot of different ideas when you are reading something. Okay, now when you're watching television, you are coming into contact with more entertainment. Reading is still entertainment. I'm not going to say it isn't. It definitely is entertainment. But with television, you're not you may come in contact with ideas through dialogue, but there are going to be a lot less ideas. There's going to be a lot less substance. It's going to be a lot thinner than the denseness that is reading something. So when I read a book, I'm immediately confronted with ideas. Whether that idea is fictional or whether that idea is metaphorical, I consider metaphorical and fictional two separate things, or whether that idea is a character commenting on or thinking about a specific thing in that world that has a parallel in my world, right? And the difference between this, I think this is the wrestling part. So wrestling with an idea, I think, is the important part, or a very important part of this, because when you watch a movie, you are very passive. When you watch a movie, there's not a lot of brain activity going on. There's always brain activity going on, but there's not as much when you read. Now, I'd have to look this up, but a lot more areas of your brain light up. So not only is it better for your cognitive, your thinking, not only is it better for your brain health, but it is also engaging you as a person more and fully, because just think about it, really. If you watch TV, can I watch TV? Or if I ask myself, I can watch TV and be really tired and still follow along with what's going on within the TV, on the screen, I guess. But I have a lot harder time if I'm reading something. Okay, so even from that, I think you can see that there is a difference between watching television and reading. Okay, and really, honestly, you could apply this to different areas, but what Bradbury was talking about, I almost said Rayberry. What Bradbury was talking about was TV. Now you have video games and you have other things that would draw our attention away, like the internet. And I think that those would still fall into the same area. I actually think that video games are probably a little more in depth. They have more depth than television. And I think to a certain degree, depending on what you're doing on the internet, that has more depth, because maybe you do a lot of reading on the internet. And that's different than if you are on Facebook, right? Because honestly, you really don't need to be on Facebook. Let's be honest. Just be honest with yourself. I have this dream one day that Facebook will not exist. It'll be beautiful. But we'll see what happens. Okay, so that is one avenue of reasoning that you actually you come in contact with more ideas, and you have to wrestle with those ideas that you wouldn't have if you were watching TV. I really think technology is the only thing that could draw us away from reading. So if there was no TV, if there were no video games, if there was no internet, I think that we would naturally go towards reading, because I think it's the most engaging thing besides that technology. And again, it really is good for you if you do read a lot. Okay, so another reason could be that it has to do with the character of the individual. Like I said before, TV requires nothing of you. And the majority of TV. Some TV requires you to pay really close attention depending on how it's written, but the majority of TV requires nothing of you. It's a really passive activity. But you have to put effort toward reading and understanding something. All right. So there's more self-discipline required when you read than when you watch television. There's a reason. Well, people do binge read. Okay. I know that people do binge read, but you are going to get more, you are going to get tireder, if that's a word, faster if you binge read than binge watch. Okay. So I could probably sit down for a week and I could probably just watch TV all day long. I'd probably get bored because it's too static of an activity. I could watch TV all day long and I'd be tired, but I'd be tired because I'm a lazy bum. Now, if I tried that with reading, maybe I wouldn't be tired actually. If I tried that with reading, I think I would have to take a break, especially depending on the heaviness of the reading. Okay. I don't think I'd get as bored either because there's more going on when you read something. Besides this, there's research that shows that reading classics like the Brontes or Jane Austen and different things like that actually increase your empathy. Okay, so it increases your it's a correlation. It's not a certainty. So if you're a psychologist out there and you're like, man, he doesn't know what he's talking about, there was one study I saw that seemed to see. There seemed to be a connection between reading these classics and empathy. And it makes sense because if you think about it, when you read something like that, it's very character-driven, it's very dialogue-driven, it's very driven by what's going on in a person's head. And you're intimately experiencing someone else's thoughts. And I think that's where the power of it comes through. Okay, that's why I think it has the ability to allow someone to be more empathetic. So you've got someone who you're reading about, and you see what they're thinking, and then you can kind of like be like, hey, I kind of think that way too, but you didn't write this. Somebody else wrote that. So someone else must have thought that same way. So I think that it has the power to humanize the writer. And when you look at other people, I think it has the power to help humanize that person to you as well. So instead of just seeing, oh, I don't know what they're thinking or they're stupid, you may think, oh, well, maybe they have thoughts similar to mine because this author had thoughts similar to mine. So maybe, and I don't think it's a conscious thing that's going on, but I think that there's a connection that goes on there. It's always good when you hear that someone is going, if you're dealing with something difficult, it's always good to hear when someone else is dealing with something similar, because it allows you to see them as more human. I think there's a lot of flaws in individuals. I've known people who they seem like they're perfect, and it's not true. It's not true. Nobody's ever perfect. And if somebody seems perfect on the outside, it's because they're very good at presenting themselves as perfect to the public. And I think that they're probably afraid of the fact that they are not perfect, because nobody's perfect. you might be a really, really great person. You might have great character. It might be an awesome person, like just very outgoing, very nice, but there's always going to be an aspect of you that isn't good. There's just part of you that isn't good, part of you that is just, there's flaws. Because you're human. So it shows the intimate thoughts, and I think that's really good, because we often, in this day and age, we don't get that personal connection as much. I mean, to as many people, I think. I think that we're distracted. I think it's harder. I don't necessarily think we don't. I just think it's harder because we're distracted by so many things, especially people my age and younger. It might be different. In the past, I think that most times today, let me back up. I think in the past, I can only see from my perspective of being a guy. I don't know what it's like to be a girl. But in the past, I think with guys, there used to be more of like a brotherhood type of thing going on. And I don't know if it's that. I don't think it's the same way today. I certainly don't see it today. But I think that's what it was like in the past. And I think it might be due to the fact that we are very distracted. We're very busy. So you just can't connect to someone on a personal level if you're extremely busy all the time. Besides the intimate thoughts that are being presented on a page as if no one's reading it, there's the interactions between two people, which might actually help you interact with someone in your own life. Now, if you take something from a Jane Austen novel and you interact with someone like that, exactly, they're going to think you're a weirdo, so don't do it. Besides that, so you've got the intimate thoughts, the interactions, and then just the thoughts in general. This is more of the idea type thing, all right? And I think it's just we're very egocentric, and I'm not saying we're full of ourselves when I say that. When I say egocentric, I think that we have a difficult time taking another person's perspective. And any time we are able to see someone else thinking, in a way that is interesting to us. Anytime we're able to see someone thinking in a way that we wouldn't have thought by ourselves, it's really good for us, because it makes us see that there are people who are intelligent out there. I think that being egocentric, part of it, if you I think you think you're more intelligent than everyone else, I think that you think you're awful and you're worse than everyone else. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. So I was having a conversation with a friend about literature class, so I'm changing gears a little bit here. And in the past, I think that literature class was seen as a avenue into peering into the human soul. Okay, that's the best word I can describe it. So it's a window, an avenue for peering into the human soul. What the heck is going on? It's a window for peering into humanity. All right, I think that's what they thought it was, and it was used in a more philosophical way to try to understand humanity or ourselves more fully. All right, and in the more present era, we've taken on a more materialistic view of humanity. So we are just synapses firing, and we're just chemical reactions in our brain. And when you read, a novel speaks against that. Okay, and I'm getting back to Ray Bradbury's quote. Just give me a second. And it shows beauty even in bad experiences. All right, it's the novel is more than just your pleasures, and you're more than just your pleasures. There's something beyond humanity, and I think that's what a great novel does, and I think that's what the great novels of the past did. So this is going back to ideas. This is going back to continuing ideas. I think that a novel has more. Now, even if you don't think there's a soul, even if you think a person is just chemical reactions in their brain, even if you think that's all a person is, I think that you could still agree with me that we experience something as humans that seems to go beyond our brains. I think that most people would agree with me. Even if you don't think it does, even if you think it's an illusion, we experience, like the consciousness we experience, seems to go beyond our brains. All right? I think that's fair to say. There's beauty, there's aesthetics, there's things we can't explain, and maybe you're like, well, we haven't gotten there yet, but it's transcendent. Okay, it's at the very least it seems transcendent. Give me that. Okay, give me that. And what I think Ray Bradbury is trying to say is that you cannot take these ideas of what a human is, and you cannot pass them on if you use the television. It just does not have the capability of it. There's not enough depth in what is going on in a television to actually encapsulate what it is to be human, or what we experience it is to be human. If you don't think there's anything special about humanity, or if you think we're just chemicals firing a brain. Now, I think that if you think about a television, if you think about TV, we're just seeing something, we're just hearing things. It's very shallow. There's a band I like, and he talks about, that's a different band. There's a band I like that talks about how the television or what's on the screen is essentially like a skeleton of a story or a skeleton of a person rather than a full thing. It's very shallow. And a book is not shallow. It has a lot of depth to it. If it's a really good book, it goes through layers of the individual. It goes through how they think, how they feel, how they react. And it gets you engaged in a way that the television doesn't. So it requires you to put effort toward it. And I'm a very big fan of effort put toward understanding art. And a video game doesn't do this. Television doesn't do this. Music, I think, does this to a certain degree. But I think that a book does it because it engages your brain on a conscious level. Now, music, I think, does this to a certain degree, but it generally doesn't do it on a conscious level. And I think that consciousness is important. So I don't know if Bradbury's correct, but I think it's I don't know if getting people to not read destroys the culture. I can think, if this isn't his thought process, I'm guessing it's something similar. It's probably better than mine. But at the very least, I think we should take the idea seriously, because maybe we are losing something in relation to who we are as humans, and we just don't know it. And maybe we aren't seeing what full humanity is, or we aren't experiencing it as much because we don't have specific ideas that would be carried along by books that can't be carried along by television. Just a thought. So we're going to jump to the fallacy of the week. The fallacy of the week is really simple. It's wishful thinking. And wishful thinking is making a decision or basing an argument according to what is pleasing to you, rather than the evidence or the reasoning behind that thing. And I think this is really easy to fall into. So if something makes you uncomfortable, I've heard people, and I've had this go through my head as well. I've had conversations with people, and I think, man, that's a really, really grim view of the world. And just because it's a grim view of the world, just because I don't really like it, doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. Now, there's other reasons that I had for not liking the idea, but just because it's not pleasing, just because it's not pleasing to me, just because I think, ooh, I really don't like that, does not mean that it's wrong. So if you're using that argument, or if you say, oh, I don't like that, I don't think that's right, it's not a good argument. All right, that's all I've got for you this week. I hope that this is something to think about. I think that understanding who we are is really important. I don't know if it happens as much as it did in the past. I don't know, because I didn't live in the past. But I think that it's something that is important to do. It's like, just ask yourself, like, what is it to be human? Is it just chemical reactions? Or even if it's based on chemical reactions, even if it comes about from chemical reactions, is the whole more than the sum of its parts type of thing? Are we more than just that? Is there more of a purpose to humanity? And I've got my own ideas about that, of course, and you've heard about my ideas in relation to that stuff, I think, to a certain degree. But I think it's probably the biggest question we're asking, and depending on how you answer it, will change how you live your life, I think. It will change how you treat people. It'll essentially change the purpose of humanity depending on how you answer it, right? Depending on what's the truth. So I hope you have a good rest of your week. My name is Daniel Poppie, and as always, this is How to Write Good.